the scriptures? Ready to get excited? I was at Liz Shore. We ordained Liz Shore last night. So those of you that are praying for Liz, give them a call. Keep her in your prayers. She is in quite a battle, and so keep her. Would you stand with me? I'm going to read the gospel out of Luke, chapter 2, verse 8. I'm going to read about 4 verses here out of the English Standard Version. Verse 8, and in the same region were the shepherds out in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. How many have heard this story? You ever heard this story? Just 2 of you, okay. And the angel of the Lord appeared to them. Say, he appeared. And the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were filled with great fear. Man, it would scare me too, right? You know, every time the Lord shows up, you have an option. You can either be afraid. I'm convinced that we talk a lot about how we want to see the Lord, but if we ever see the guy that created everything, if we ever see him, we might just go, oh. And they were greatly afraid. And the angel said to them, fear not, for behold, I bring you good news of great joy. Say, great joy. Great joy. You do realize people are staying away from us because we don't have much. For I bring you, say you. Look at your neighbor and say, I'm bringing it to you. But it's for everybody. You do understand that God gives you the news so that you can tell everybody else. One of the reasons why the world doesn't know this story is because you've never told them. He brings you the news so that you can give the news. And I also want to say that most of the time churches aren't filled with good news. But I bring you good news of, say, great joy. Great joy. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is the Christ the Lord. Yeah. And this will be a sign for you that you will find the baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. Father, may we today be overwhelmed with the reality of the good news that you are here. That not only did you come to Bethlehem, but that you have come into our life. That you have come into this moment today, December the 11th, 2022 in Hutchinson, Kansas. You are here. And we can find you in our hearts. We can find you in our families and find you in our lives. And so, Lord, this morning, help us to be filled with that joy of knowing that you have come to us. I ask it in Jesus' name. And all God's people said, amen. Amen. You may be seated. You know, we all live by stories. We tell ourselves stories. We tell ourselves stories about Christmas. How many got a great Christmas story? Anybody got a great Christmas story? I had a great Christmas story. I've got this story. I think I was 12 or 13. And anybody remember 1969, this greatest snowstorm that ever hit the state of Kansas? We didn't move for days. It was great. But anyway, I remember this Christmas. I was 11 or 12 years old, and I was attached to my dad. But it seemed to me like somewhere in October that I never could. Dad was always gone, and every time I got ready to go, his truck was already out the driveway. My dad was a carpenter, and he did all kinds of side jobs, and I loved going on side jobs with him. And I began to think by mid-November that Dad was mad at me, that I had gotten too old, and maybe he liked my little brother more than he liked me, you know. And so I was really depressed, and then Christmas came, and there wasn't anything under the tree that had my name on it, and I know because I looked a couple of times. You've never done that, have you? Crawled under the tree to see if your name was on anything? Yeah, you did. And I'd crawl under the tree and nothing there. Get up on Sunday morning and everybody else opens everything they got, Pete. And there was not one thing under the tree with my name on it. I was convinced then that Daddy loved Michael more than he loved me. It was horrible. There's fear set in. Great fear. Great fear set in. And my dad said, oh, son, would you go out on the back porch? And see, some of you weren't raised with back porches. You know, we had this back porch that had been closed in, and then you'd insulated it, and that's where the washer and dryer was, and that's where you stood. Never mind. And it was inside, and the cats got to stay there. They never got in the house, but they got, and you could get surprised in another way there. And I went out on the back porch, and there was this Honda mini bike. Now, some of you aren't old enough to even know what a Honda mini bike is, but it was red and gray, and it said Honda. It didn't say Sears or Craftsman. It wasn't one of those, no. You didn't have to do this. It was just a little bit. And great joy filled this 12-year-old boy's heart. Great joy. And what I came to understand was that my dad had been working all these side jobs on the side to buy, I don't know how much that thing was, but in 1969, $300, $400, $500 might as well be $4,000 or $5,000 today, right? The joy of receiving. How many of you ever had that joy, that Christmas story, that just the joy? But can I tell you what I can remember more than anything? I can remember screaming and all kinds of things. But what I remember more than anything is turning around and seeing my dad stand in the doorway of that back porch. And I can remember his face. I mean, it's as clear in my mind today. The exchange that went on between a father and a son. The exchange that took place between two people and the relationship. The knowing that one had sacrificed for the other. The knowing the motorcycle's long gone. Seriously. My dad has been in heaven 37 years. But that moment and that joy lives on. See, the stories we tell ourselves are what shape our lives. Paul says in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, be ye transformed by the renewing of your... Most people are trying to catch a way of thinking and change it. Don't think this, think that. Nah, play again. Because you'll kill yourself trying to do that. You really want to transform your mind? Change the stories that you tell yourself. What are the stories that you remember? What are the stories that keep washing over your soul as Christmas approaches? What are the stories about Christ that we tell ourselves? We celebrate Advent in this church, have since I've been here, quite frankly, because I think you need to be reminded of the real story, of the whole story. And the story of the birth of Christ resulted in something. The story of the birth of Christ wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger, the fruit of that story, what it produced was something called joy. And I always get concerned around Thanksgiving because by Black Friday, we're thankful for nothing. We're thankful on Thursday, but by Friday, we're frazzled. Because am I making any sense yet? You see, the world should know that Christ exists because you are full of joy. Because you can remember a story about how Christ gave his life to you. Because you have memories of how someone showed their love to you. And those stories and that reality should transform you in such a way that it produces this joy unspeakable and full of glory. Can I tell you, 90% of the world today are missing something. And they're always telling me about what they're missing in their spouse, what they're missing in their job. If only this was done. There's no sense of satisfaction that God is in my heart. And though this human being may not, or that person or this thing, you see, happiness, joy on steroids, happiness and joy are the result of knowing that there is a relationship between you and Christ. And that once I have that relationship with Christ, the joy is the results of that. I talk about my dad a lot because I really believe that my father revealed that heart to me through his life. And I can name others that witnessed and revealed what it was to be a Christian to me. Christmas should be a time that we realize that we have joy because of this gift of His presence. Not His present, but His presence. That the real joy on that back porch in Severy, Kansas was not the two-wheel mini bike. But the real gift was the love that existed between one human being and another. That was the everlasting, never-ending, ongoing. And that we have the opportunity to reveal that to one another over and over again. And that we can choose to relate the story of Bethlehem, and we can choose to look at it and recognize that that story is repeated throughout our lives if we are willing to participate in this wonderful ritual of giving and receiving, of giving to one another that reality of love, of life, of value, of matter. David understood it. Someone this morning already used the verse. It's in Psalm 16. In His presence is fullness of joy, and at His right hand. The difficulty is most people don't know how to recognize His presence. They think His presence is a feeling that when the song hits and no, His presence is found in the love that we have for one another. I found God's presence early in my life because of the love a grandmother had for me. I found His presence in my life because of the love a father had for me. You see, the love of God is ethereal until it becomes in the flesh. For God so loved the world that He gave. And we're celebrating how God became flesh. The only God your children will ever know is the God you let them know through you. The only God your neighbor will ever know is the God you let them know. Otherwise, God remains invisible and out there somewhere. He remains a theory and a doctrine and a dogma until it becomes tangible and you can feel it. And the love that I have for my Father was but a mirror and an image and a reflection, a window, if you will, into the love of God. We, the church, are here because we are supposed to be the manifestation, the ongoing extension of Jesus Christ in time and space. We are supposed to help people understand that if you want to acknowledge and feel the presence of God, you find it with us. And to be real frank with you, I'm getting old enough that I don't care how some of this sounds, because for most of my life, the church has been so caught up in judgmentalism that the church couldn't find that holy grace. I had somebody say to me the other day, well, you don't want to abuse grace. No, you cannot abuse grace. That's why it's grace. You'll get it in a minute. I would say if anybody abused grace, it was Pilate and Herod and those people on the side of the hill called Golgotha. That was abusive, but it didn't stop it. Think about it. It's Christmas. What are the stories that we're telling? What are the things we're remembering? Are we realizing that throughout our biblical history, there are these people that have always reminded us that in the midst of challenges, we make a choice to rejoice. That even when the fig does not blossom, yet we will rejoice. That in all these things we rejoice. That even in prison, as Paul and Silas were there, they begin to sing. That James makes that outlandish statement that consider it all joy when you fall into these various trials. Peter goes on to say, think it not strange when something has happened to you, but rejoice. That we too have the same choice as those shepherds on the side of that hill. When we are surprised by something, we can either realize that God is with us there and that it is good news, or we can be afraid of this thing. Have you ever surprised anybody? Have you ever hidden behind the door and, come on, have you ever stood on the other side of the shower with a cold, come on, Pete, you and I know what this is. Come on. You ever stood on the other side of the shower with a cup of cold water and just waited and then threw the surprise? I mean, have you ever just waited around the door, turned the light off or banged or something? And it just scared the bejeebies out. Have you ever done that? Yeah. Have you ever had it done to you? Yeah. Okay. Can I just tell you, you never do that to an enemy. Because they'll kill you. The only reason I surprise Annie is because I know she loves me. The only reason I surprise her is because I love her. What I'm trying to say to you is, if you've ever had a surprise, it's because the initiation behind the surprise, is because I love you. And surprise, I'm now here. You get it? But at that exact moment, you have a choice. You can either be afraid of his presence, or you can be with joy that he steps into your sin. See, I can remember the first time I realized I was a sinner. I can remember the last time I realized, about an hour ago, that I was. Oh, you didn't kid it. I'm continually reminded of how unworthy I am. I'm continually reminded that this 12-year-old didn't deserve the extra hours that my father spent to give me something that I certainly didn't need. See, a surprise is when God shows up in our human lives in a way that we don't deserve, and for a fleeting moment, we don't know whether he's there to judge us or to love us. And I'm telling you, I'm old enough and long enough and have enough standing to say the church has not always been on the right side of that conversation. Because when God shows up, can I tell you, he is a God that's always there to forgive your sin, to wash it away, and to surprise you with the reality that he's going to embrace you. Amen. In the midst of your sin and your shortcomings, in the midst of your failures and your imperfections. And that is Christmas. And here's the beauty of it. We get to do that. We are supposed to be able to walk into people's lives and say, listen, I'm a pastor. I have to walk into people's rooms every day, and initially they don't know whether they want me there. Am I making any sense? Joy is the results of an unexpected relationship. Joy is the results of her saying yes. Joy is the results of an unexpected return of affection. Surprise! And that joy. I'm always surprised that in the midst of my own self-reflective, depressing thoughts, he goes, well, son, it's not on your shoulders. It's on mine. That was yesterday's word as I was belaboring how I was going to get everything done. And he goes, well, it's not on your shoulders. Well, I thought it was. I mean, never mind. I need therapy. See, in his presence, there is this joy. And Nehemiah says, the joy of the Lord is our... You do realize that if we have no joy, we have no strength. So if we're weary and tired and we stayed home and stayed in bed, it's because we don't realize his acceptance and his coming to us and that joy that moves mountains, that joy that he has left with us. It's Christmas, and it is all about giving. It is all about giving. And I realize people are going to go, well, you're just bought into the consumerist thing. I get that. I get that. But I got news for you. it is in the giving of that love. It is in the giving of that. He gave to us his presence. And his presence produced inside of me this joy that I can never get away from. There are sometimes I walk down the hall of a hospital and think, if they see me smiling like this. But you do realize the medical system is broke. I'm sorry, I've worked for them now long enough. I can tell you, it's broke. Time out. You know, they were overwhelmed in the pandemic, and I kind of understood it. Now we're overwhelmed because it's the flu. The world system is broke. The only hope there is that Christ is coming. That's the only hope there is. Joy. But here's the interesting thing that I want to try to wrap up to you this morning. We know that God gave his son Jesus, right? But did you know that until Mary gave herself to God, that it is God's will to give his love to the world, but that God, the invisible God, can never give himself to anyone until someone here agrees to give themselves to him. That it took a woman to agree to give herself. He didn't rape her. He didn't abuse her. But it took a human being to say yes to God's grace and say, yes, work through me. There would have been no angel in the sky had there not been for a woman in the room. I realize we're not Catholic. Before you freak out, go screaming out of the room. But maybe we should respect Mary. My suggestion is, I'm not telling you to pray to Mary. I'm not telling you, but I am suggesting that maybe you need to take another look at the prototype of a woman that said yes to Christmas. Yes, I'll give of myself. Because God's ability to give to us is dependent upon our ability to give ourselves to him. And that Christmas will remain elusive unless there are human beings that will say yes and give themselves to him. And so Christmas can be missed in Hutchinson, Kansas, unless there are people in Hutchinson, Kansas that will say, yes, I'll serve soup on Thursday night. Yes, I'll give another $20 to buy another kid a gift that they won't remember, but maybe they'll remember the feeling. I don't expect them to remember the Star Wars toy we buy them. I don't expect them to do that. I expect them to remember that somebody's cared enough to. Am I making any sense? Mary gave herself to God before God could give himself to you. If Mary hadn't given herself to God, God could not have given himself to you. I kind of sound Catholic, don't I? Or maybe Orthodox, or maybe just truthful. Maybe it's just truthful, and you name it whatever you want to, but maybe just, no, we're not putting a Mary statue up next week. Chill out. Lord, oh, never mind. Shondai. I was working in the hallways the other day, and this friend of mine who is a Catholic priest, and I called him up to do something, and he said, do you have one of these? And he had this little book, and I said, no. He goes, well, you need to get one of these. And he said, can you do that? Can you read that? I said, yeah, I can read that. He goes, well, if you can do that, you can do Catholic. And I said, okay. And he goes, I can do Protestant. I said, you can? He said, yeah. I said, really? He goes, yeah, hallelujah. So we've agreed I can do him, he can do me, and we're all okay. That'll probably come back to haunt me. Because the point is we've both given ourselves to Christ, that Christ might give himself through us, and we really don't care whether it's Catholic or Protestant or Methodist or Baptist. And I really love coming across somebody. Am I making any sense? Mary, I'll give you 4 little things. Mary was available. Mary was available. Do you know how many times I reach out to people and they're just unavailable. If God's ever going to manifest himself to the world, he's got to find people that have a little availability. Are you available? Well, no, I got so many. I've had people all day tell me, well, I can't. I get it. I'm just looking for somebody who is available. It's interesting. I'm so glad. You know, Mary was too young. Elizabeth was too old. Do you know the story? Mary and Elizabeth, her aunt. And one was too young, one was too old, and then, you know, Zacharias was too deaf. You know, isn't it interesting how God can speak to Mary and Elizabeth, but he has to give a dream to Joseph? Never mind. Men don't shut up and listen unless they're asleep.
Well, that needs to be on a shirt.
Stop. Don't tell Pat. Pat will make me that shirt. She said that needs to be on a shirt. Never mind. Mary was available. Look, maybe not. Maybe just say to yourself, I will be available. Yeah, it doesn't go well when you say it to somebody. Just say it under your breath. I'm available to you, Lord. The next 14 days, I'm gonna strive to be just a little more available to you, a little more available. And number two, I think Mary was very aware. I could say awake. She's very aware that things that were impossible to humanity was possible to God. Amen. She said, how can this be? And he said, well, things that are impossible to you are possible. Mary was aware of the supernatural. Mary believed in the power of the supernatural. I get it. It's a bowl of soup on Thursday. We're just going to pour soup in it. But in that natural act, something supernatural can take place. It's just a Star Wars toy. It's just that. But God can take something that's common and supernaturally use it. He can just take the womb of a 15-year-old Jewish girl and he can birth. She was fully aware that God was supernatural, that he worked with signs, wonders, and miracles. You know, about half of the Church of America thinks that's all dissipated. They're no longer aware that God does supernatural things. Number three, I think she paid attention. And I don't think she just paid attention on that first visitation. I think she listened to the wise men and it said, pondered it in her heart. I think she paid attention when he was in Cana of Galilee as he said, woman, what does that have to do with me? Did you notice that Mom said, just do whatever he says? She knew he couldn't help himself. He would be generous. She paid attention. The scriptures say, pay attention to my words, for out of them flow the issues of life. Proverbs chapter 4. Are we available? Do we have time for God to speak to us about how he wants to work through us to give to others? Or did we just come this morning to get our need met? Or did we come this morning to recognize he's already met our needs according to his riches and glory, and now he wants to release through us streams of provision that come from heaven because we've been united with God through the grace of his mercy, and that now he can utilize us to reveal himself to the world? Are we available to be used in supernatural ways? And are we paying attention to even the slightest of things? The fourth thing, and I almost missed it until the other morning when I was praying, is I believe that Mary lived, and still does. You'll figure that out in a minute. An appreciation of the fullness of who God is. I believe that 15-year-old Jewish girl had an appreciation for the faith of her forefathers. She knew Isaiah's stories. She knew the stories of how God had rescued them from Egypt. She knew the stories that we were waiting on one. She lived in appreciation of the fact that God was rescuing humanity that God would never leave us nor forsake us, that God would work through us. She appreciated the fact that God partners with his creation, that he doesn't work separate from us. He works in union with us. And now then, I think you and I have to appreciate the fact that if there's going to be a Christmas today, we're a part of it. And we can either live the next 14 weeks just trying to get the turkey ready, or we can realize that we have some of the greatest opportunities we've ever had in the next few days. To be at a little church in Wichita, Kansas last night and just let the Lord lead us through a step or two that maybe make a difference in somebody's life. Am I making any sense? I mean this with all the kindness of my heart. Every day of my life right now, I'm just from one step to the other. I ain't got a clue what I'm doing. If anybody asks me what I'm doing, just let them know I ain't got a clue. I don't think Mary had a clue, but she was available. She was aware of the supernatural. She paid attention, and she remained appreciative of all that God is and all that God continues to do. And it released joy. It released joy. We can release joy in the lives of people that we don't even know by giving. No wonder God loves a cheerful giver. For as you give, it will be pressed down, shaken together, overflowing into your life. I would tell you that until you learn to give, you are cutting yourself short of the joy that is heaven. I will never forget the look on my Father's face. I'll never forget it, because he had more joy, Dale, than I did. You want joy? You want to be stronger? You want to walk in that? Then intentionally pay attention. Intentionally be aware. Intentionally be appreciative. And give. Just give. Find ways in the next 14 days to give. And when you do, it'll change the world. If you came this morning just to hear the same old story, you know the story. The greater challenge is, can we keep living the story? Can we put it to practice? Can we live it out in Hutchinson, Kansas? Amen? Amen. Can I tell you my worst story at Christmas? Nicholas was 8 years old. 8. We lived on 8th Street. We had bought all these presents. We'd put them under the tree. And I heard this noise at about 4 o'clock in the morning. And I got up. And that little guy had got up at 3. And he had went out and got under that tree. And pulled all of his gifts over here. All of his sister's gifts over there. And he had unwrapped every one of his gifts. He was joyful. I've never let him live it down. You don't have to be there when they unwrap that gift. You don't have to see the look on their face. Because it really isn't about you. I've told you 2 stories out of my life. I hope you're catching them. I wasn't there, but I was there. Am I making any sense? Are you catching? You don't have to see the look on their face. You don't have to see them Listen, one thing you should do is there's a tree out there that's got an envelope on it, and you can buy a pair of shoes for somebody in Honduras. If that's more comfortable than the foster kids, do that. You don't have to see it. Stand with me this morning.